For more than 3,000 years, the people who came after this pharaoh worked to make his face vanish from the earth. They chiseled his name off the walls. They pulled down the city he founded. They left him out of the king lists, as though the throne had passed from his father straight to a stranger. By the time the dust settled, Egypt had agreed to forget that he had ever drawn breath. The one thing that outran them was the way he had himself drawn. On temple walls and on colossal statues, this king ordered the artists to show him in a shape every pharaoh before him had refused: a long, narrow skull, a drooping, heavy face, wide hips, a soft belly, a slack chest, spindled fingers, the body of something caught between male and female, between a human being and something else. For a century, doctors looked at those images and reached the same verdict the ancient priests had reached for their own reasons. There was something the matter with this man, something he was born with, a body built incorrectly from the start. That is the file we are opening today. Akhenaten, the heretic king. The pharaoh history tried to delete, and the pharaoh medicine tried to diagnose. And the strange thing about both efforts is that nearly everyone who ever signed a verdict on this body was looking at a picture of it, rather than at the body itself. The body has been on a table for more than 100 years. It tells a colder, simpler story than the sculptures do. This is what we are actually working with. In January of 1907, in the Valley of the Kings, a young excavator named Edward Ayrton, digging for the American collector Theodore Davis, broke into a small, single-chambered tomb. The catalogs would call it KV 55. Inside was a flooded, rotted ruin, a dismantled shrine, a coffin knocked off its stand, the lid slid open, the gold face of it torn away, and on every surface that had once carried the owner's name, the name had been cut away. Someone came to this burial for the single purpose of stripping the identity off the person inside it. In the wreck of that coffin lay a body, a male body, worn down mostly to a skeleton. The subject is male. Preservation, skeletal, with little soft tissue surviving. Recovered in 1907 from KV 55. West Bank of Thebes. Identity at the moment of discovery, deliberately destroyed. This is the only royal body to reach the modern world with its name surgically removed by people who wanted it gone. For most of the last century, this body carried an empty line where the cause of death should sit, because it could barely hold a name. The first question skipped past how he died. It fixed on who he was. And underneath that sat a second question, the one the portraits had been forcing on everyone for 3,000 years. What was wrong with him? I have had this man's son on the table. I read The Boy from KV 62 not long ago, the one the world calls Tutankhamun, and that body told a hard story. A fragile teenager with a ruined foot and a chronic fever, the last of a line that had folded in on itself. The DNA that closed the boy's case pointed straight back to here, to this nameless body in KV 55. The science says the man in this coffin fathered that child. If you missed the boy's file, the short version is that something in his blood had been failing for generations. Today we stand at the place it came from. What we are doing is rebuilding the examination from the body up, from the bone rather than the brushwork. Cause of death, mechanism, manner, and the question the carvings keep shouting over, what this body was actually shaped like. First, the man, because a body only reads alongside the life that wrote on it. He came to heresy late, and he came to the throne almost by accident. He was born a younger prince to Amenhotep III, one of the wealthiest kings Egypt ever produced, and to the great queen Tiye. His older brother held the place of heir. When that brother died, the spare became the successor, and a prince named Amenhotep inherited a throne meant for someone else. For the first years of his reign, he behaved, in the record, like an ordinary pharaoh. Then something turned. He declared that the old gods of Egypt, the entire crowded pantheon of them, were finished. There was one god now, the Aten, the disk of the sun. He changed his own name from Amenhotep, which honored the god Amun, to Akhenaten, which bound him to the Aten. He walked away from the ancient capital and raised a brand new city out of empty desert, a place we now call Amarna, and he dragged the whole machinery of the kingdom out to it. In that same window, the way he had himself shown changed completely. The early images give us a conventional man. The later ones give us the creature from the statues. The long skull, the hips, the hanging chest. He had his queen, Nefertiti, and his daughters carved the same way, with the same stretched heads. An entire royal family redrawn into one strange silhouette. The most extreme of those images came early, from a temple he raised to the Aten at Karnak. The colossal statues there show him with a long face, a hanging chin, thick lips, thin arms, broad hips, and a belly that swells above the waist. At least one of the figures stands fully nude, with the sex left off the body entirely. These are the colossi that launched a century of diagnosis. They are also, as it turns out, the images that sit farthest of all from the bones in the coffin. That silhouette is what carried this pharaoh onto a medical examiner's table in the first place. Beginning with the anatomist who studied the KV-55 body in 1907 and running for the next 100 years, physician after physician stared at the Amarna images and tried to name the disease. The list runs long. Froehlich's syndrome, a disorder of the pituitary gland that can soften and feminize a male body. Marfan syndrome, which stretches the bones long and the fingers thin. Klinefelter syndrome, where a man carries an extra female chromosome. Antley-Bixler syndrome, which fuses the bones of a growing skull. Aromatase excess, which floods a male body with estrogen and grows breast tissue. Androgen insensitivity, where a body half deaf to its own male hormones develops along female lines. 6 diagnoses. 6 specialists. Each one made an elegant case. Each one explained the long head, or the wide hips, or the soft chest. Each one arrived in print with real confidence. Every one of those diagnoses shared a single flaw, and it is the kind of flaw that gets a finding thrown out of any case I have ever worked. They were made from a painting, every last one of them. When the body itself finally went under a scanner, it answered all 6 at once. This is what the body is. Strip away the statues, set the KV-55 skeleton on the table, and you are looking at an unremarkable adult male. The skull sits inside the ordinary human range for its shape. The long bones carry standard proportions. The fingers are the fingers of an average man. The face the artists pulled into a long oval falls, in bone, within the same range as the faces lying around it in the royal cache. A formal examination of these remains back in the 1960s had already reported precisely that physique and proportions inside the typical range. When Egyptian and German teams put the body through computed tomography in the late 2000s, they confirmed it in detail. The renewed scanning, in the words of the team that ran it, put to rest the idea that this family carried a congenital disease like Marfan that might explain the elongated faces in the art. The bones came back clean. Read that slowly, because it overturns a century of medical literature in a single line. The long skull is absent from the actual skull. The spidery Marfan fingers arrive instead as the hands of an average man. As for the swollen, froelish body, the pelvis is plainly ordinary. 6 diagnoses, 6 syndromes, all of them describe real diseases. This body carries none of them. Where, then, did the monster in the statues come from? It came from a decision, not a disease. The shape entered the art at the precise moment Akhenaten remade the religion. Before the Aten, a conventional king. After the Aten, the long, doubled, androgynous figure. The body held steady across those few years. The theology is what moved. He was presenting himself as the single living image of a God he described as both father and mother to all creation, the source of all life, beyond male and female because it stood as the origin of both. The elongated, sexless body was a piece of religious propaganda, as deliberate as the new city and the new name. He was showing his people his God. They mistook it for his diagnosis. I have watched what it costs to diagnose a body before you examine it. I remember a man brought into a morgue in Ohio whose family had spent years certain he carried a wasting illness that ran in their blood. They could trace its progress. They had watched, they believed the same thing take an uncle and a grandfather before him. When he reached my table, they handed me the diagnosis before I lifted the sheet. The body told me something quieter and entirely apart from their account. The illness they were so sure of had grown up inside the family's own stories, repeated and believed across years, until everyone could see it plainly on a man whose bones were clean. A reputation is a powerful instrument. It can hang a disease on a body that was perfectly sound. That is exactly what 3,000 years did to Akhenaten. That clears the 6 diagnoses off the table. It leaves the harder question upright, and it is the one that actually matters. If the wrongness everyone has chased was missing from this man's body, then where did it live? Because something in this family did fail. I have seen it. It is lying in the next room, in the body of his son. The KV-55 body gives up one more fact under DNA, and the whole case turns on it. This man was a son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye. The woman who mothered his heir, a body the catalogs label only the younger lady, was herself a daughter of Amenhotep III and Tiye. She was this man's full sister. The same 2 parents stood behind both of them, and between brother and sister came a son. That son was Tutankhamun. This is where the father's body stops being a medical curiosity and turns into the source of a catastrophe. A pharaoh marrying inside the family was already ancient by Akhenaten's day. Egyptian kings had taken sisters and half-sisters for centuries, partly in imitation of their gods. But a custom and a loaded weapon are 2 different things, and what separates them is how tightly the bloodline folds. A union between full siblings concentrates a family's hidden flaws faster and harder than almost any other pairing a person can make. Every one of us carries a few silent, broken genes that stay harmless while the matching copy holds sound. Marry a stranger, and your children almost surely draw a good copy from one side. Marry your sister, who carries the same broken genes from the same parents, and the odds that a child inherits 2 broken copies climb steeply. Akhenaten's own body absorbed that risk, and by every sign, came through it whole. He grew up. He ruled for around 17 years. He fathered 6 daughters with Nefertiti, and 1 son, Tutankhamun, with the sister whose body now lies a few rooms away in the same museum. Whatever he held, it stayed silent in him. That is exactly how these things move. The carrier walks around in good health, holding a hidden danger, and the danger only speaks when 2 carriers meet. He chose a carrier, his own sister, and in the next generation, the silence broke. If reading a body the way a cold case finally gets read, rather than the way the legend gets repeated, is the kind of work you want more of, the subscribe button is where you mark this channel for it. There is always another body waiting under the lights. Set the son beside his father, and the contrast carries the entire case. The father, a sound skeleton wearing the reputation of a monster. The son, a body the carvings passed over in silence, quietly holding the real damage. When that same project turned to the boy, they read a body in trouble, a clubbed left foot turned inward, bone dying inside it, starved of its blood supply. On that same foot, one toe was missing its middle bone, a palate that had failed to close over. Later researchers have pushed back on parts of that reading, arguing some of the damage arrived after death rather than at birth. What holds, undisputed, is the shape of his short life. He leaned on canes to cross a room. He was the child of two people who shared the same two parents, and his body carried the weight of it. He lived fragile, and he died young, the foot and the fever and the inheritance closing on him together. That is the wrongness the world went hunting for in the father. It was real. It simply lived elsewhere than his bones. It lived in the choice those bones were still free to make. Akhenaten was built sturdily enough to carry what he held. He was careless, or perhaps powerless, and he handed a double measure of it to the child he made with his sister. The statues lied in one direction. The reputation lied in the other. The truth sat between them, where it tends to sit. To the eye, the king was sound. In his blood, something ran deeply amiss, present from the day he was born, and he passed it to a son whose body broke under it. Now the honesty this body demands, because it is a fiercely contested one, and I will say so plainly. Two things about K555 are still argued by serious people. The first is the cause of death, and the answer is short. This body withholds it. The bone is whole, the surface clean, the joints intact. A killing wound would show on bone. A fracture or a disease gnawing at the skeleton would leave its own signature behind. This body offers silence instead. The most diagnosed pharaoh in history, the body handed 6 syndromes from 100 yards away, gives back a flat quiet when you finally examine it up close. Whatever ended his life passed through him and left behind a mark too faint for a skeleton to keep across 3,000 years. There is a reason for that, and it sits in the nature of bone. Soft tissue is where most causes of death are written. A failing heart, a torn vessel, a fever, a dose of poison, these live in the organs and the blood, and on a body worn down to bone, they have long since vanished. A skeleton keeps violence. It keeps a healed break, the notch of a blade, the dent of a crushing blow. A quiet death leaves the bone an empty page. The second argument is sharper, and it lives at the identity. The DNA is solid on the relationships. This body belongs to a child of Amenhotep III and to the father of Tutankhamun. The name we hang on top of that is an inference, and the strongest candidate by a wide margin is Akhenaten. But a serious problem sits underneath, the kind a careful examiner has to say out loud. When the early anatomists aged this skeleton, they read it as a young man, somewhere near 20 to 25 years at death. Aging a skeleton is one of the first skills a pathologist learns, and it leans on parts of the body that change on a schedule. The growth plates at the ends of the long bones fuse in a known order through the late teens and the 20s. The seams of the skull close slowly across adult life. The face of the pubic bone wears in a steady progression, decade by decade. On this skeleton, those signals clustered young, and the early examiners read a man barely into his 20s. Akhenaten ruled for roughly 17 years and was already a father early in that reign, which would carry him well past 40 by the time he died. To move the body into that range, the team that argues for Akhenaten read the same growth plates and the same skull seams a very different way, and aged the bones up into the 30s or 40s. Other readers hold to the younger estimate. If they are right, the man in this coffin is someone other than Akhenaten, a shadowy younger king of the same house, possibly the one we call Smenkhkare. On this single question, one skeleton has handed 2 ages to 2 sets of careful people. I can tell you whose son this is. I cannot hand you his name with the confidence the documentaries use. The file stays open on those 2 lines. That is the correct place for it to stay. This is what the report says. Cause of death, undetermined from the remains. The skeleton is free of any lethal injury and free of any fatal disease process that could survive on bone. Whatever the mechanism, it left the table empty-handed. Manner of death, undetermined. With the cause blank, an honest manner stays out of reach. Natural is the quiet assumption, given the calm, violence-free surface of the bone, but an assumption falls short of a finding, and I decline to sign one as though it carried more. What the body does establish, it establishes cleanly. This is a son of Amenhotep III and Tie. This is the father of Tutankhamun. This is a structurally ordinary adult male carrying a clean bill on every congenital disease the art has been blamed for over a century. And this is a man who married his own full sister and, in that act, concentrated a hidden inheritance until it destroyed his son. The category history filed him under is the one I want to refile. Heretic is a religious charge, and weighing it belongs to someone else. The medical charge is mine. The deformed, diseased, broken-bodied king. That verdict has been read off his paintings for 100 years, and the body throws it out. The world named the wrong flaw. He was built wrong, yes, but in a place the eye could slide right past, and the proof of it sits 1 room away, in his son's coffin. There is one last thing this body was made to tell us, and it sits outside medicine entirely. It is the reason the name was cut from the coffin. It is the reason his own people tried to keep you from ever seeing his face. When Akhenaten died, his revolution died fast behind him. The priests of the old gods he had tried to abolish came back into their power, and they came back furious. His desert city was surrendered to the sand. His temples were pulled apart and their blocks reused face inward, so the carvings would press against stone forever. His name was struck from the lists, and the kings who followed pretended the throne had passed cleanly from his father to a later ruler. The heretic, years quietly deleted. Someone reached into the KV-55 coffin and carved his name out of the gold, because to the Egyptian mind a name was far more than a label. It was the part of a person that survived. Erase the name, and you erase the man from eternity itself. They were thorough. They came within a breath of succeeding. For most of recorded history, Akhenaten was a gap in the record, a smear of scraped stone. A king the record was made to forget. And this is the thing that undid all of it. The face he ordered, carved in defiance of every rule of Egyptian art, the long, strange face his enemies scrubbed at and failed to erase, is one of the most recognizable royal faces the ancient world ever produced, second only to his own son's golden mask. The propaganda outlived the men who tried to bury it. We know him today because of the images, the very things he raised to glorify a god. They wanted him forgotten. He made himself unforgettable in the one medium that defeated their chisels and the irony runs deep. The face that rescued him from oblivion is a face he never actually wore. The body in the coffin is only a man. An ordinary skeleton, the gold above it stripped of any name, the bone holding its silence on every disease and on the cause of his death. Everything that made him a monster, and everything that made him a god, he painted onto himself by hand. The single thing he truly built, wrong, he carried past all seeing, and he died long before it reached the boy and finished him. One last question before I let you go. If a body came to you stripped of its name, accused by every portrait of a disease the bones flatly refuse, silent on whatever ended it, yet carrying in its DNA the proof that it had doomed its own child, what would you write on the line that asks for identity? And what would you write on the line that asks for cause? Tell me how you would sign this one. I read every comment. Thanks for watching.